Hi everyone, Mrs. Mazzola here, ready for another math lesson. This week's is going to be on area. Might be a review for you, but it'll be a good review. So grab your notebooks or your math notebooks or a piece of paper and a pencil or something to write with, and you can take some quick notes to help you with your understanding and your assignments this week. Here we go. So when we're talking about area, we need to know the definition of it first to help us understand what it is that we're trying to find. So the area of a shape, go ahead and grab your pencils or your notebooks if you want to write down this definition, is the space inside of a shape. Or I like to say the amount of space a shape takes up. Okay, and we calculate this by using a formula that is length times width equals our area. And we'll look more at this in just a second. I'm going to kind of clear up that W. There we go. Length times width equals area. So what we're doing when we're finding area is we're counting the squares that are inside of a shape to help us figure out what that area is, how much space it takes up. And we use that using square units. And that's why when you hear people talking about area, they say feet squared or centimeters squared, because they're counting those squares. And those squares might be in feet, they might be in centimeters, they might be in kilometers, depending on what you're measuring as far as the distance. So for example, if we have a shape that looks like this, we've got 3 on that side and then 4 going across that side. And we're going to pretend that these side lengths are in feet. So this side, if we were to count, we've got 1, 2, 3 of them. So we would label this as 3 feet. That's the length of that side. Then if we did the same to the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, we've got 4 feet going across the top. So thinking back to probably 2nd or 3rd grade, when you were first learning about area, you probably counted each of these little squares on the inside. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. But now that we're in 4th grade, we know some shortcuts for that. We know that we can count by our 3s because we can see these groups here of 3s. And we know that doing that is multiplication. I can do the same thing with 4s because I can see groups of 4s right here. So that's where that length times width equation comes from. This is my length, this is my width, or vice versa. It doesn't really matter because with multiplication, we can change them around. So with this shape, I can either use 3 times 4 equals my area, or I can do 4 times 3 equals my area. And then all I have to do is count those up. And we did that just a second ago when we were counting by our 1s, and we found out that our area was 12. But when we're writing area, writing just the number doesn't finish telling people the amount of space it takes up. We talked about that we're counting these squares. So we have to show people that that's what we're counting. So in this case, those squares were made up by feet. So we need to add feet to the end, but we also have to show somebody that we were counting squares. So the math symbol for counting squares is a 2, a small 2 up above that unit of measure that we're using. So our full answer for area would be 12 feet squared. Okay, and that's how we would say it, because we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 square feet or feet squared inside of that shape. That's how we're going to calculate area. Okay, so let's do another practice one. So if we've got a shape that looks like this, and these won't be quite as exact anymore. This one has a side of 5 inches and the top is 8 inches. And we want to find the area, that space inside of the shape. So we need to do a length times width equals area equation. So for me this time, my length is 5, my width is 8, and that should give me my area. Or I can flip those two around. 8 times 5 equals my area. And if I needed to, I could go through and count them. This doesn't line up quite exactly, but I could go 5, 10, 15, 20, or no, I'd go this way, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and do that 8 times. Or I would count by my 8s, 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, until I got to my 5 sides. You could count your groups that way if it helps you to see it. Or if you're good with your multiplication facts, you can just solve it. And you would find out that your area equals 40. 8 times 5 or 5 times 8 equals 40, but we're not finished with area. We have to have our units of measure. In this case, they were inches. Okay, so we need to put our inches, and then we have to tell somebody that we were measuring those squares inside of our shape, measuring the space it took up. So we need to finish with our squared. This is very important with area. You have to have your symbol for squared. Otherwise, it's not telling somebody it's area. It could be anything else. It could be just a random number that you pulled out of your head with inches attached to the end. This squared at the end tells them you are measuring area. Okay, so we're pretty comfortable with a length and a width given to us and finding that area. But you are going to start seeing some different problems that look like this, where maybe not all of the sides are given to you, but the area is. So let's take a look. If we have a problem that tells us that the area equals 70 centimeters squared, and then it gives us a shape that looks like this, and one of the sides is labeled with 10 centimeters and a big old question mark on the other one. So we might be thinking, well, how am I going to figure this out? How do I know what that other side is? I know that the inside is 70 and the outside is 10. Okay, so think back to our equation. We want a length times a width equals our area. So we can plug in what we've got so far. We know one of the lengths is 10. So 10 times something, because I don't know that width, but I do know my area equals 70. This might look like an equation you know how to solve. You might realize, oh, I know how to do that. I can just count by my tens until I get to 70. Or you can flip it around into division. 70 divided by 10 will give me that answer. So once we solve this one, we can figure out how many tens it takes to get me 70, okay? And if you needed a visual for this, you could count by your tens going across until you got to 70 and see how many of them it took you, which is the same thing you're doing with this equation right here. All depends on how you need to solve it. So in my head, I'm pretty comfortable with counting by my tens, and I figure out that that question mark, that missing side equals 7. But it's not just 7, I have to have a unit of measure here. So if I look back to my problem, my area answer up here was centimeters, this side length was centimeters, so I need to add centimeters to the end of my measurement. Now you might be asking, well, why aren't you putting your squared here, Mrs. Mazzola? Well, you have to look at what the problem's asking you for. In this one, this 7 centimeters is a side length. It's not that total area in the middle. Only the total area that something takes up inside it is counted by those squares and needs the squared. Okay, if we're only finding a side length, I'm just counting how many little tick marks it took me along that side. So it took me 7 of those centimeter tick marks along my side. Okay, so let's do one more problem and you work along with me and see if you can do this one, because this is the little more tricky version of finding area. All right, if I tell you that your area equals 48 kilometers squared, and I give you a shape that looks like this, with one of the sides equal to 8 kilometers, what is the other side? Okay, so take a second if you'd like. You can pause the video and solve this one, see if you can get the answer before I finish solving it. I'll model it for you here in just a second. All right, so now maybe you've had a chance to solve it. We need our length times width equals area, but just like with our other one, we don't know what both of our length and width are, so we have to set this up a little bit differently. So I know my length is 8, and I don't know my width, so 8 times something has to give me my area of 48, because I do know my area. So I might decide to flip this around into division and do 48 divided by 8, because that's the opposite of multiplication. That will give me my question mark. And if I solve that, even if I need to do it visually, I could count by my eights, 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, and I can count that I had 6 of those, 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48. So I got 6 of those 8s that it took me. So my final answer would be, my question mark equals 6. Okay, now I have to put my unit of measure back on there. So it would be 6 kilometers. And it's not squared because this is a side length. It's not the full area inside of counting those squares. Okay, so I just have 6 kilometers. So make sure that when you're doing your area equations that you're careful to see what pieces you have. Do you have your length and width to be able to just multiply and find your area? Or do you have only one side and your area, and you might need to do some division to find that missing side length? So be careful and don't get tricked, and don't forget your units or your units squared. Good luck, everyone.